Greetings in Jesus' name this morning. And if you're visiting here today, welcome. Just glad to see so many visitors. The title for my message this morning is Living a Crucified Life. Several times as I was typing this out yesterday, I misspelled the word crucified, and when I did a right click to correct the spelling, it brought up synonyms for this word. The synonyms for crucified were executed, tormented, and killed. If you think about it, what was horrible about crucifixion was the agony that it produced before dying. But Jesus said that this is how we are supposed to live. He said we are to deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him. Now just imagine with me this morning, literally following Jesus. Let's say he's walking down the highway right out here. And he said we are to follow him. But we are following him on the road to Calvary. So ahead of us is Jesus. He's bowed down. He's beaten. He's bleeding. And he is carrying his cross. And behind him comes us, a trail of Christians. And each one of us is also bent and bleeding. And each one of us is also carrying a cross. Now, I believe Jesus was speaking spiritually, but we know that there are people in the world who have died by crucifixion just as he did. But I believe that though he was, for the most part, talking spiritually, that in some ways the pain is similar. For this crucified life, it will hurt. And so what I want to emphasize this morning is that the effective Christian life is the crucified life. But to get to the gain, we will have to go through the pain. To get to the life, we have to go through the death. To live crucified is to be selfless. To live uncrucified is to be selfish. And sometimes Christians have self-centered pockets in their lives that are uncrucified. And it is very unattractive. We may not even be aware of it, but often others are aware of it, and they're turned off by the self that they see in our lives. The uncrucified life is unattractive. The crucified life is attractive, but the only way to it is to become crucified. Paul understood this because he said, I am crucified with Christ. What is this crucified life that Jesus and Paul both lived and spoke about? How do we live a crucified life? What does it cost, and what does it gain? These are the questions I hope to address in this message. Again, the title this morning is Living a Crucified Life. Turn with me for a text to Matthew 16. Matthew 16, and let's begin reading in verse 21. It says, "From that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go into Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and be raised again the third day. Now this is towards the end now, Jesus' 3.5 years of ministry. He's coming to the end, and he's been saying things about his death for a while, but it seems like he often cloaked it in spiritual language. And as he comes now to the end of his life, he begins to speak plainly about his coming suffering and death. And you could say Jesus was trying to communicate to his disciples that I came. He came for many reasons, right? But he came to be crucified. This was part of his purpose, was to be literally crucified. Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, "Be it far from thee, Lord. This shall not be unto thee." Now, if we are called, like Jesus, to live also a crucified life. We were talking in our Sunday school class this morning about trusting God, and why can't we trust God who has never let us down? I have a hard time trusting someone who lets me down, but God has never let me down. Why is that such a problem? And the thought that came to me was, it's because God may want me to live a crucified life. I don't know if I trust him or not for that, whatever all that means. And so there's always something within us that when Christ brings the cross into our life, that rises up like Peter here in verse 22 and says, no, the natural self does not want to go through this experience and thinks life will be much better to leave the cross out of it. Verse 23, but he, Jesus, turned and said unto Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men." It's actually Satan behind the temptation to avoid the cross, which is so appealing to us as humans. When the cross comes into our life, we want to avoid it, and Satan will be right there to offer the temptation. And Jesus recognized that, and he said, "Get behind me, Satan." Then said Jesus, verse 24, unto his disciples, and this passage is recorded also in the book of Mark, and there's something in Mark that's recorded there that's not listed here. But in Mark 8, verse 34, Jesus always had a crowd of people following him, right? Or nearly always. So I would imagine it this way. There's this big crowd of people. The 12 are clustered right up close behind Jesus. And behind them is all the rest of us, right? And in Mark 8:34, it says, when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also. So it's like the disciples were within earshot, and it's like this was so important. This is a teaching moment here. And Jesus is like, okay, all y'all come up here. I want all of you to hear this. Not just my disciples. I'm saying this to all of you. And this is my core verse, verse 24, what he said then to his disciples and to all the people. And I think Jesus is still saying this to us today. If any man, any of you, if you're 14 this morning or 15 and you're thinking about, well, maybe I should be a Christian, or wherever you're at in your life, you're thinking about the cost. If any man or woman wants to come after Jesus, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. I believe that Jesus, I'm hoping to spend the last part of the message trying to explain what this means. And I know that I can't explain it, but I'm just going to give you what came to me as I was studying about this. To me, what Jesus is saying is, I have come to live a crucified life. And if you would come after me, then this calling also belongs to us. If you want to follow, if you're 14 and 20, whatever you're thinking about this, you want to follow Jesus, then you need to know that the path that Jesus trod, the way that he walked, the way that he lived, had a cross in it. And so it will be for you and me. I'm going to show you the kind of life that you must live if you will come after me. I believe that Jesus, he explained it, and then he instituted it. And what I mean is, this is the pattern that it's going to be. There's no other way to follow after Jesus but the crucified life. And then he demonstrated it. He literally himself demonstrated living this kind of a life. Verse 25, for whosoever will save his life shall lose it. We naturally want to save our plans, our comfortability, my life, protect ourselves from the cross. But if we do so, he says, we're going to lose it. And even the saving of my physical life, I think that we can apply it there as well, that just don't let me go to Ukraine right now, or whatever it might be, right? Trying to save my physical life. And he says, if that's your pattern, just always trying to save your life, putting up these walls and just living behind this white picket fence, just me and Jesus, no, you're going to lose your life. And whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. So if you want to follow Jesus, the cost is you lose your life. I was going to bring another passage in, and I decided not to, but you remember when Jesus called the disciples in the beginning? There's 4 fishermen recorded there. It was Peter and Andrew he called, and then a little bit later he saw James and John, and he called them as well. Remember that? And it says, and they left. They left their nets. They left their boat. They left their father and followed him. Well, I think of it as, when we think about becoming a Christian, we think about I'm going to give my life to Jesus. But more the biblical pattern is you leave your life. You leave your life. Meaning that these men were willing to walk away from their vocation, from their parents. They left the life that they wanted to follow after him. And I think that's similar to what we see in verse 25. Whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever will lose his life for my sake. And Mark says, and the Gospels. For my sake and the Gospels shall find it. Is that what you have experienced in your Christian life? Like, you came to a cost, and there's always a cost. It's not like it's a one-time entry fee and then it's smooth sailing after that, right? That's not how I find it. I find that there continues to be, it seems like there's always a cost in front of me. But every time I just pay the price, there's just that joy of, and when I don't pay the price, what do I get then? There's that heaviness, there's that knowing that I chickened out. I didn't pay the full price. But it's when have you experienced it that way? When you just surrendered all, did the hard thing? When you said anything, Dennis, right? When we can truly say that, that is when we find life as a Christian. That's when the Christian life becomes rewarding. If we're holding back part of the price, then it's always a drudgery. And so, if we want to find life in being a Christian, we lose our life. You will find it. Verse 26 yet. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? I just saw this headline the other day that Jeff Bezos, how many of you know who Jeff Bezos is? I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. But anyways, he's the founder of Amazon. He reclaimed the title of the richest man on the face of the earth right now. Jeff Bezos is the richest person on earth, surpassing Elon Musk. The Amazon founder's net worth was $200 billion, while Musk followed at $198 billion. That's just from about a week ago. But Jesus said, what would it profit a man to have $200 billion and to lose his soul? If you try to save your life, you'll probably lose your soul. But if you lose your life, you'll save your soul. All right. We're just going to now, for the rest of the message, talk about verse 24. Now, when I first read this verse, and of course we've read this verse many, many times, but I thought of it as two different things in here, okay? He's saying in the beginning of the verse, if any man will come after me. Okay, so in other words, this is before you're a Christian, you're thinking about it, you desire to be with Christ, to have him in your life. And so we know that if we want to do this, we're going to have to follow Jesus, right? But before that comes, I thought of it as two separate things. One is, first, I have to deny myself. And then second, take up the cross. I've come to think of that more as two parts of one thing. Like this is actually one thing, but maybe in two parts. So let's look at the first part of that. What is the self that we are to deny? We need to, if we're going to be a genuine, authentic Christian, we're going to need to deny myself. All right. Does that mean to deny too much cake? You know, when I would like another piece, what does that mean? I think it actually could include that. We got invited away for lunch today, and so I'll have to remember that if they have dessert. I don't know if they have dessert or not, but yeah, you guys can watch to see, those of you that will be there. But so, self. I've explained this probably before, but I'll just say this again, that I think there's two ways to think about myself. And one is the natural human self, and the other is the carnal fallen self. I think each of us are made up, have that within us. We're just a human being that likes dessert. We like friends. God gave us these desires. They're God-given, and there's nothing wrong with them. We have a desire for friendship. We have a desire to sleep. We have a desire for pleasure. And these are all fine as long as they're done in moderation. And so if we're not doing it in moderation, then that would, I would say, be part of the package is to deny those natural desires that are not wrong, but they need to be within moderation, within certain boundaries. I think more what he was talking about is the carnal fallen self. That is also, it's not eradicated when you become a Christian. It is still in there, but it needs to be ruled over by the Spirit of God living within us. All right, and this natural fallen self, it does not get reformed. It is always just ugly. It is always selfish. It is always carnal. You can never, feed it, give it its food and it starts behaving better. No, it always behaves bad. It always acts out. So we need to rule over this. It loves itself. It is selfish and self-focused. And I found this verse in 3 John verse 9. I'll read it to you. You can turn there if you want to. But that kind of encapsulates what I think this fallen self that loves itself, kind of a way to define it maybe. 3 John verse 9 says this, I wrote unto the church, let me start over again. I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, receiveth us not. So John is trying to reach out to a particular congregation, but I think it was the bishop there or the preacher there, some man of importance there, Diotrephes, he didn't let John in somehow. And he mentions this about Diotrephes, and he says, he loves to have the preeminence. Now, I looked that word up, and it means to be fond of being first. To be fond of being first, or ambitious of distinction. In other words, loves to be noticed. Now, the preeminence, that is what our fallen self is made of. It loves itself. Now, here are some things that I'm just wondering if you have ever thought about this and ask yourself, is there any carnality in this? For example, here's some ways that this tends to pop up within ourselves. We tend to love to look at ourselves. Like posts on our status or Facebook, or a lot of the pictures that are in our phones are of, guess who? Myself. If someone looked ugly, we probably wouldn't take very many pictures of them. But we don't think that we look ugly. Maybe you do. Most of us tend to think we look okay. We look pretty good. And we don't mind having pictures of ourselves. I'm not saying you shouldn't take a picture of yourself. I'm saying that sometimes there might be some carnality mixed into it, and we don't even think about it. We're so used to doing it. We tend to love to talk about ourselves. I've noticed this, that if somebody says, we went on vacation last year, like if I'm in a conversation with you and you say, well, I went on vacation, I went to so-and-so. Then when you're done talking, then I will begin to say, and I went on vacation last year over here. We tend to make financial decisions based on the comfort of saving or the pleasure of spending. We tend to interact with other people based on, now I'm talking about the carnal self, is what I'm talking about. I'm not saying you're always doing this, but I'm saying we're prone to, where this is always a possibility. We're going to do these things anyway, right? We're going to take a picture, we're going to interact with people, we're going to make financial decisions, but it is very easy that without maybe noticing it or realizing it, that there's a carnal little that gets into it, and self dictates the decision. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. We tend to interact with other people based on gaining their goodwill and approval. Self will interact with people based on what it can withdraw from the interaction rather than what it contributes to the interaction. Okay? So, what I'm talking about, another way to describe it maybe would be an underlying and hidden motivation that evaluates decisions and interactions by what it gets out of it. This is how our carnal self operates. I'll read that again. Our carnal self operates this way. It is an underlying and hidden motivation that evaluates decisions and interactions by what it gets out of it. In other words, I'll interact with you if I believe there is something in it for me. Now, part of why I want to share this message is because of just in the last 2 weeks, the Lord revealed to me some of this carnal motivation in my own heart. And I'm going to tell you what one of these incidents, there was 2 things that happened recently that afterwards I was just so embarrassed how easy it was for me to just, I knew this what it was. It was that I'm supposed to be the preacher. Like, I'm not supposed to be doing this, but I fell right into it. About a week ago or so, Hannah had got hurt at school. She slammed into one of her friends on the playground. They face to face. And some of you heard about it. We ended up going to the emergency room just to make sure her eye swelled shut. She had bleeding down her throat, and we went to the hospital to check it out, make sure. We think she had a concussion. So I was at work. Sheila brought Hannah over to work, and Hannah was laying there in the seat and was, feeling awful. And I wanted to be the dad that rescued my daughter. So, shall we take her in or not? We weren't sure. We went back home, and then we decided to take her in just to be safe. And we decided, well, what if they admit her? Then we're all trapped up at the hospital. We decided we'll all go, and so we decided we'll take 2 vehicles, and that way, if one of us needs to come home, then the other one can stay. And anyway, so it's time to go out to the vehicle, and Hannah was sitting out in the van, and one of us needed to drive Hannah, sick person, and the other one needed to drive the old bomb, the Impala. And Sheila trotted out and hopped in the van. And we didn't even talk about who was driving what vehicle. But as soon as she did, I felt this thing in my heart. I want to drive the van. Why don't you drive the Impala? And I just felt this resentment just pop up right there. I felt righteous. Like I should be the one doing this. And but later, as I thought more about this, I was just feeling this kind of huffy. But later, as I thought through, it's like the thing that, like, I thought she was doing this to have the preeminent. Now, she was not. She was innocent, by the way. I was the one who was guilty. She was innocent. But it felt to me like she's trying to have the preeminence. She's going to jump in, and I get the leftovers. But what was embarrassing was to realize that the thing that I resented, what I thought she was doing, is what I strongly myself wanted to do. I was terribly embarrassed after that. There was one incident that happened the week before that I just realized, you know what? I was embarrassed by how present those kinds of feelings were in my life, how strong they were, and how easy it was to just go right there. And it made me wonder, where am I doing this in other areas of my life that I don't even, we fall into this, we don't even think about it. I don't even think about it. Where else am I actually serving self very righteously, but there's this selfish underlying thing that's driving the decision? And so the Lord brought me to repentance for that. I guess that is the self. The natural self, yes, the appetites and the extra dessert and those things, those need to be denied. But that carnal self, do you recognize it? When it happens, do you recognize it? That's what it is. Deny that. Take the cross. And it seems to me that if we're going to follow Jesus, you could say, maybe you could say it this way, like some people have maybe they sleep on a bed of nails. Maybe they're skinny as a rail because they only eat spinach and they're denying themselves. But there's no cause in it. If the only cause is self-promotion, well, then there's not much value. But if the cause for my self-denial is the cross, then there is value in it. So denial without a cross, self-denial without a cross, or you could say a cause, is meaningless. But so the reason that we are called to deny ourselves is for the cause of the cross. And Jesus' cause will be advanced in the world most of the time through suffering and through you being, like somebody said, little and unknown, loved and prized by God alone. That's the cross. Deny ourself. Now, thinking about taking up the cross, what does it mean? He says to deny ourselves and take up the cross. And these, I'm posing it as two questions, but it's actually these things just intermingle to each other. So it's kind of one thing. But I want to look now at, in Galatians, this thing about being crucified is mentioned 3 different times, 3 different areas. And the first one I mentioned in the opening. So what does it mean to take up my cross? And number 1, I'm going to say it means to be crucified to my own will. In Galatians 2:20, 3 times in Galatians, Paul talks about being crucified. And Galatians 2:20 is the one we're most familiar with, where he says, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. See, that is where we're supposed to be. Galatians 2:20. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. So Paul was saying not saying that he was crucified physically. He's saying he was crucified, I believe, to his own will, to his own life. He had left his life. I am crucified with Christ. Christ was crucified physically. I am crucified spiritually. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. I lay down my life. I am crucified to my life, my plans, my will. I'm not saying it's wrong for you to have your plans, but when your plans, do your plans always come underneath God's plans? I lose my life, my will, and my plans, and I take up the plans of Christ. And if I need to adjust my plans so that I can fit into the plan of Christ, this is what I will do. I am crucified with Christ. What does it mean to take up my cross? Number 1 is to be crucified to my own will, to my life. Number 2, to be crucified to my flesh. Galatians 5, verse 24. And they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lust. What does it mean to have crucified our flesh? I think of that as our passion, our desires. My desire to be noticed. My desire to be approved of. My desire to be comfortable. The desires, like we are so much ruled by desire. Just last night, It was late. I hadn't eaten any supper yet, and Alec didn't either. And we got the sandwiches out, and we were just going to each make a sandwich. And I noticed there was not much chicken breast left. I really like chicken breast. I don't like the ham very much. I like it okay. But I like chicken breast better, but it was almost gone. And so I'm laying out both of these meats, and I wanted Alec to pick first. And I was just hoping. I thought about suggesting, Alec, why don't you take the ham? That's better for you. I could just feel that. And our desires, like my appetite for the chicken breast was so strong at that moment, I almost made my sandwich first. Just, you know what I mean? That our desire, whether it's an appetite, some kind of a passion that we love, something, our desires very much. I think that's what it means when he says, they crucify the flesh with the affections and lusts, the desires of my flesh, whether it's food, whether it's approval of other people, whether it's a hobby or something I want, whether it's money I want to spend, my desires are so strong, and no, crucified to the flesh, crucified to my will, crucified to my will, my life. Number 2, crucified to my flesh. And then number 3, crucified to the world. Galatians 6, verse 14. God forbid that I should glory save in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom the world is crucified unto me, and I unto the world. I will not have. If I am crucified to the world, I will not have the same heroes, the same goals, or the same methods even. Just yesterday, I saw an email about the Super Tuesday. Were any of you paying attention to this? Super Tuesday, last Tuesday, was when all these states voted for their presidential candidate. And I saw a quote there from Donald Trump. And he said, we trounced. Well, this was posted on, it said he posted this on his Truth social media platform. And he said, we trounced, and the word trounce was in capital letters. We trounced Nikki Haley, he said, and when we had the greatest victory ever, something like that on Super Tuesday. Was that the method of Christ? Is that how Christ, we trounced? No. That's the method of the Gentiles. That's Gentile leadership right there. And Biden's probably doing the same thing. I think we should respect and pray for our leaders. But they will not use these they are not crucified to the world. They will use the leverage and the manipulation and the self-promotion. That's the methods that they are free to use because that's the kingdom that they are in. But so shall it not be among you. Crucified to my will, crucified to my flesh, and crucified to the world. Honestly, we know too much about all the heroes and the stuff that's going on in the world around us. And finally, number 4, crucified to my own physical life. Meaning, I will give up my life before I would deny Christ. My will, my flesh, the world, and even my own life. Isn't that what Jesus himself did? Even to his own life. I deny myself so I can give preeminence, not to me, but to the cause and the cross of Christ. How can we work on this? Maybe I'm the only one that struggles with denying myself, but I'm pretty sure that you can identify with some of what I'm talking about. I want I want to do what it says in verse 24. I want to come after Christ. I want to follow him, and I want to take his recipe. It is hard. But so how can we work on this? How can we work on it? First of all, we are going to have to recognize it. Others tend to see it before we do. And you know what? Isn't this true? When you see someone, let's take the sandwiches, for example. And if you know the other person is taking the chicken ahead of you, and you recognize that selfishness, isn't it kind of gross when you see that other person just kind of very politely and very righteously, but kind of barging ahead of you and being selfish? Isn't that kind of gross, actually, when we recognize it in other people? So often, it's repulsive, especially among Christians. So often, we don't recognize it within our own selves. So let's ask God to show us, and just somehow to begin to more carefully evaluate our own, that inner motivation. Is it free of that? And if we see it in ourselves, let's repent of it. Let's just own it and admit it. It's self, and it needs to go. And let's work on it. Let's work on it. Let's recognize, resist, and reorient our life to be a servant. In Luke 22, Jesus says, well, this is where there was a strife among the disciples. Which of them should be accounted the greatest? And Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors, but ye shall not be so. But he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief as he that doth serve. For whether is greater, or who is greater, he that sitteth at meat, or he that serveth? In other words, if you're having a big feast and somebody, or you go to the restaurant, who is the honored guest? It's not the one serving the table. It's the honored person sitting at the table, he's saying. Which one is greater, he that sitteth at meat, or sitting at the table, or he that serveth? Is it not he that sitteth at meat? Isn't it the honored guest, he's saying? But he says, but I am among you as he that serveth. The opposite of selfish is being a servant. And Jesus, this was his pattern. Though he was Lord of all, he came to serve. And I'll just tell you this. As I thought about my own embarrassment just in the last week or so, my little starting place is, I'm trying to intentionally work on this, is just at the dinner table. Did you need more bread? Can I pour the water? I'm trying to think of things like this and how can I just, what I'm trying to do is, well, let me put it this way. Here's the target, not just for me. This is for all of us, okay? To recognize and deny self, and instead of taking up a hidden, let me say this again. I recognize and deny self, and instead take up a hidden, serving, giving life, sacrificially laying down my life for the sake of Christ and the gospel until it becomes unconscious. That's a long sentence. Right now, it seems like in some areas of my life, I have to consciously be conscious about it. But I would like for it to be, and I think this is how it was for Jesus himself, that it was just an unconscious way of living. Deny yourself, take up the cross, and live a crucified life. One more thing before we close. What is the gain? That was one of the questions I mentioned in the beginning. What is the gain of the crucified life? Are you gonna, if you really do this, I trust you are doing this. Is your life going to be miserable? Like, that's always what Satan throws at us. I mean, if you really go all in, you're just going to probably have to go off to Africa somewhere, right? That's what but that's not true. What is the gain of the crucified life? Number one, the crucified life is personally joyful, fruitful, and faithful. when you really know that what God is calling you to do, you've said yes. You've denied self. You've taken up the cross. This is where life becomes rewarding and meaningful. That's part of the gain. Number 2, the crucified life ministers to others. Jesus says, Matthew 20, verse 28, the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto or to be served, but to minister or to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. I believe it is the people that, not the people that know the most that influence the most, but it's the ones who sacrifice the most that have the most influence on others. It ministers to others. When there is someone that you interact with that is living a crucified life, it feeds me, it lifts me, it blesses me. And last of all, the crucified life brings glory to God. Did you know that as you deny self and take up the cross, God is glorified through your suffering? In John 21:19, when Jesus was talking about Peter, he talked about how he was going to face death. And then the next verse says, this spake he, Jesus, signifying by what death he should glorify God. Peter's death was something that was glorious in the sense that because he denied self and took up the cross, God got glory out of it. In closing this morning, all of us want to be like Jesus, but we don't always want what it costs to be like Jesus. And what it costs is to deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him. That is, we must recognize and deny preeminence to the appetites, the attitudes, and the ambitions of self, and instead take up a hidden, serving, giving life, sacrificially laying down my life for the cause of Christ and the gospel until it becomes unconscious. In Matthew 25, verse 37 to 39, Jesus spoke about the judgment of righteous persons. This is what it says. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered and fed thee, or thirsty and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick or in prison and came unto thee? It seems to me these righteous were so selfless in life that they did it unconsciously, and in eternity they will hear these words, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. What about you this morning? Are you living a crucified life? Crucified to the world, to the flesh, to your own will, and even crucified to your own life. If we seek to save our life, we're going to lose it. But if we lose our life for the sake of Christ, we will truly find the joy of the life that Christ has for us. Let's kneel together for prayer.